Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, and welcome back to our streamers on X and live streamers. I'm Peter Brimlow. I'm the editor of vdare.com, and this conference is being held at the Berkeley Springs Castle, which is our headquarters and conference center. I'm very honored to introduce to you now Dr. John Lott. I've known John Lott for nearly 30 years when I tried to recruit him to be a columnist of Forbes magazine. He's what I think could best be described as a distant academic, and he's had a number of fierce quarrels with the rest of the academic establishment over a number of things. The most important, best known for him, is his insistence that, as he said in one of his books, more guns means less crime, more guns, less crime. Needless to say, this flies in the face of the conventional wisdom and makes him a very unpopular man. One of the things that struck me about his work when I was looking at it recently, he has actually done a comparison between Britain and America, and he finds that in the US, in the US, about 13% of burglaries are home invasions. They go in while the people are in the home, but in Britain it's over 60%. And in Britain, they go in at night when they know people are there because they want to force them to reveal where the valuables are. In America, the burglars tend to go in during the day because they don't want to meet anybody with a gun. This is very interesting to me because at VDare we have a regular feature called a month in the death of white America, where we just use mainstream sources to chronicle the relentless toll of black on white killings, as opposed to a very small number of white on black killings. And you see a number of trends or themes in those black and white killings. Perhaps the most significant is extremely dangerous for white women to date black men. But it is also true that we see a gradual increase in home invasions. And I think that is because of the collapse of law enforcement in the US. And that's what John is going to talk about today.
Well, thanks, Peter. I appreciate being invited here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about something that I think has been in the news a fair amount recently, and that is just how the claim is that crime is falling in the United States. You know, you can go, I mean, I could give you 50 of these types of headlines, but here's one from ABC. I don't know, for some reason this is messed up, but violent crime is dropping in the U.S., even if Americans don't believe it. That's from ABC News. This one, or I think maybe, I can't tell because it got cut off there for some reason. All the colors are different here than what I gave them. I don't know what the deal is. And here's another one. This may be from ABC. I think this is from NPR. Murders plummeted in the United States in 2023 at the beginning. One of the fastest rates of decline ever recorded. Asher found in every category of major crime except for auto theft declined, yet 92% of Republicans and 75% of independents and 58% of Democrats believe crime is rising, the Gallup survey shows. And as I say, you could find lots of claims like that. You know, the thing is, what I don't think most people understand is that there are two different measures of crime. And they're looking at one, but I don't think they understand kind of the differences and how the different numbers are put together. So the one that the media is using right now is the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports program. And what that does is it counts the number of reported crimes to police. But there's another one there, because not all crimes are reported to police. In fact, most crimes aren't reported to police. From the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and it's called the National Crime Victimization Survey, and it asks about 240,000 people each year whether they have been victims of a crime. And the point of that is to try to get a measure of both reported and unreported crimes. And these two measures of crime, usually tend to move roughly together. but they haven't been doing that since 2020. They've been moving in very opposite directions, very dramatically so. I'll give you a simple example. You look at the crime data for between 2021 and 2022, the FBI data shows that violent crime fell by 2 percentage points. The National Crime Victimization Survey shows that total crime increased by 42%. So, those are fairly different numbers. Just, why they're doing this, maybe they just don't understand the numbers that are there. Maybe it has to do with the fact that they want to make Biden look better before the election. Maybe, I'm sure an issue that Peter would want to talk about in terms of kind of allaying people's fears about illegal immigrants coming into the country. I have to say, I have a little bit of a disagreement. I'm concerned about illegal immigrants, but my past work finds a difference between legal immigrants and illegal immigrants, that legal immigrants actually have a low rate of crime, low rate compared to Americans generally, but illegals have a high rate of crime compared to Americans generally. So anyway, we have those two different measures. Now, there's several problems with the FBI reported crime data that maybe the media just doesn't understand. One of them is the fact that over the last few years, there's been a huge number of police departments that have stopped reporting crime data to the FBI. In 2022, you had 31% of police departments across the country that have stopped reporting crime data. That includes Los Angeles and New York. Now, it's not like those numbers aren't at all in there. What happens is that the FBI kind of guesses what the correct numbers are there and puts them in. So there's some numbers. The question is, in my mind, how good of a job that they do, and I question how good of a job they do on that. The second problem is one that I haven't looked into too carefully yet, but there has been claims that there's some cities that the data that they give to the FBI, and for Baltimore, the number of murders, the FBI records a different number than what they gave them. And those seem to be systematically low, though I assume that can't be for too many cities. I just haven't seen enough detail on that yet. The third thing is what I'm going to concentrate on right now, and that is I think there's basically been a collapse of the legal system in the law enforcement system. And what happens is, and something that's pretty well known, is that if people don't think you're going to catch the criminals and they don't think you're going to do anything to them, there's not much point of people reporting those crimes to the police. And so you'll find that as arrest rates go down, the rate that people report crimes to the police will go down. And I'll just show you, they got some pretty, and obviously all these things, the defunding of police departments, though they've started to increase the funding in a number of places again, massive retirements of police, even places that have tried to go back and hire police officers have found it very difficult to go and do that, hard to get replacements. People don't want to join police departments, and they've had to lower their standards a lot. But you've also lost a lot of very valuable human capital. People who have been police officers for a decade or two are leaving. And, it may take 3 or 5 years before an officer ends up kind of becoming very effective on the job. And so even if you try to hire somebody, in the last year, they're not going to be the equivalent of somebody who you lost who maybe had 15 years of experience. And then, of course, you have district attorneys, well-known ones across the country. Alvin Bragg in Manhattan wants to have people convicted of crimes in accordance with their shares of the population that are there, rather than whether they're guilty or not. And but the problem that you have also for not kind of going and charging and prosecuting people is that police officers are discouraged from going and arresting people to begin with. If they think the people that they arrest are going to be immediately released and not charged, then that raises questions in their minds whether they should even arrest the people to begin with. And then, and then you have the issue of if criminals aren't caught and punished, it reduces the incentive for crime victims to report crimes, and that's one thing I'm going to concentrate on. And if criminals aren't going to be charged or convicted, it kind of reduces witnesses' willingness to come forward. You know, if you go and you say somebody did something wrong and you're willing to put your name in a police report, but then nothing happens to the person, all you've done is get the person possibly mad at you. And one thing that is very true with criminals is they tend to commit crimes in areas near their home. And so you have that problem too. So this just shows you arrest rates for violent crimes. And these first 5 lines here are from 2015 to 2019. This is for all cities, and these are for cities with over 1 million people. And you can see things are fairly constant from 2015 to 2019, and then it begins to fall. In 2020, the FBI didn't put out the data for 2021, but I assume it probably was down there too. But you can see the average arrest rate for violent crimes in all cities was 44%, and it was also 44% in cities over 1 million. So it falls from 44% to 35% in just a few years there. That's a huge drop. And for cities over 1 million, it falls from 44% down to 20%. So this is just 20% of reported violent crimes result in arrest. Now that doesn't say that they're charged. Some of those individuals aren't going to be charged, some of them aren't going to be prosecuted, and some of them aren't going to be convicted. We don't have breakdowns for that. And I can show you graphs by area, but just kind of go through the numbers. If you make the same comparison by type of crime, you had a 38%, this is for the large cities, you had a 38% drop in arrests for murder, a 50% drop in arrests for rape, a 55% drop in arrests for aggravated assaults, and a 58% drop in arrests for rates for robberies. I've looked at crime data for decades. I've never seen such a huge drop in arrests ever, even over decades, let alone within just a few years period of time. And here are the numbers for property crimes. You can see they were fairly constant, a little bit of a decline, but as soon as you get to 2020 and 2022, obviously you had big drops that were occurring. You can see for the large cities, it's bouncing around 12% or so, and then it goes down to 4.5%. Again, this is 4.5% of reported crimes, but you have to remember most crimes aren't reported to the police. It just gives you an idea of what that means. If you want to take arrests as a share of total crimes rather than reported crimes, for all cities, about 20% of violent crimes, of all violent crimes, reported, unreported, result in an arrest, 3.8% of property crimes. But then if you look at large cities, only 8% of all violent crimes result in arrest, and only 1.4% of property crimes result in arrest. So those are pretty startling numbers. And I'll just show you this, because, for decades, academics have known that as the arrest rates go up and down, you're going to have changes in reported. So here, this top line is reported violent crimes. This top line here is reported property crimes, and this is the arrest rate. And if you look closely, kind of when this goes up, this goes up. When this goes down, this goes down. You can see kind of the bumps there, and the same thing true with property crimes. And this is true across countries. And it's one of the reasons why it makes it very difficult to make comparisons of crime rates across countries. And that's because the rate that you catch criminals is very different across countries. And so in some countries, people say, what's the point of going and reporting crimes to the police? So the reported crimes may be low, but that doesn't mean crime rates are low in those countries. There used to be something called the International Crime Victimization Survey, which was similar to the U.S. National Crime Victimization Survey. And one of the other issues about comparing crimes across countries is that crimes can be defined somewhat differently. So like sexual assaults may be different in different countries. And so one of the benefits of the International Crime Victimization Survey was make sure that people understood that the same definition was being used in comparisons across different countries. They essentially would do these large surveys, kind of like the National Crime Victimization Survey. And but they haven't done it for a couple decades now. Basically, the UN took it over, and when the UN took it over, it basically died. So, anyway, so, there's one thing I want to kind of point out about who's harmed from these crimes. Again, one thing that I mentioned earlier was that criminals tend to commit crimes near their home. And so basically people commit crimes who are ethnically and socioeconomically very similar to the criminals that are there. And one of the things that you often hear is Democrats claim that they care about the poor and minorities. But while they claim that they care about it, it seems like they're more concerned about the criminals than they are about the victims. And the thing that you have to understand is that it's not just the direct victims of crime. People are hurt in many other ways because of crime. And so, you'll see the person raped or murdered or robbed or assaulted. But the thing is, when stores close in those areas, who disproportionately own the stores? So you have heavy crime areas. The people are similar to these criminals that they're not arresting or convicting, disproportionately own those stores. Who worked in those stores? The same type of minorities there. Who shopped in those stores that are being closed? The same type of minorities. Who owned homes in those areas whose property values are depressed because of the fact that you have the crime occurring in those areas. And so what I would argue is that Democrats may say that they care about the poor and minorities, but I would argue that their policies that they have, those are the very people that they're hurting the most as a result of their policies. And it's just not the fact that those same people are disproportionately victims, direct victims of crime, but they're also massively harmed in many other ways that are there.
Please hold the mic higher and closer to your mouth.
Okay. Okay.
Higher on the handle. The transmitter.
Okay.
Higher on the handle. It's creating sound. There you go.
Okay. All right. So anyway, that's basically the talk that I had here. So, I could talk about other things, but anyway, I was told not to make it too long because you guys would have questions. So I'm happy to go and answer any questions that people might have.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much, John. The mic is at the back here, and we think it's going to work now. So if you have questions, just line up at the back.
Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks.
Thank you, John, for your talk. I've seen you at the Heartland Institute before, and so I'm glad to see you again here at a place like VDARE. My question is, I've heard reports, or I've seen articles like from maybe NPR or something like that, that talk about the possibility of illegals becoming cops in certain jurisdictions. Is that something that you've run into? Can you speak to anything about that?
Well, I know they've talked about that in Chicago, for example. I can't say I've followed it too much. Generally, what I will say is that they've had to lower the standards in many places for who can become a cop. So there are a number of places where if somebody has a criminal record, they're letting them become cops, whereas they wouldn't have let that happen before.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm sure you've seen the screenshots of obvious non-whites that are reported as whites in the database. And I was wondering if you had any like statistics on how many non-white people are being labeled as white and how that's affecting these crime statistics.
Well, there's really no way for me to be able to check that. You depend upon police departments themselves to be able to go and give that data to the FBI. The FBI, for things like murder, the supplemental homicide report has very detailed data on that. I mean, I will say things like, I worked in the Department of Justice for a while. I was senior advisor for research and statistics in both the Bureau of Justice Statistics and the Office of Legal Policy. And, something like hate crime data, I don't think it's useful at all. I mean, I don't trust their data on that stuff. And there are a number of other crime data that comes out of the FBI that I don't trust. But, you have two issues here. One is how accurately are the cities reporting, or the police departments reporting the data to the FBI. And, I'm sure politics in many different ways can enter into that. Even how they classify different crimes. There have been a number of things over time where cities like Philadelphia, when Ed Rendell was the mayor, or Chicago more recently, where they will move things down from murder to something else in order to try to reduce the murder numbers that they have there. So, I mean, if you can do that for murder, I'm sure you can go and do that for other things too.
Thank you.
Sure.
John, that's interesting that you work for the Justice Department. I'd like to know just your opinion on Merrick Garland. I noticed when the Biden administration came in to office, the war in Ukraine hadn't happened yet. Obviously, what happened in Gaza had not happened yet, and it seemed there in 2021 at least that the policy of the Biden administration was almost like a domestic war on terror, as far as focusing on the post-January 6th people, white, hate crimes, hate groups, and all this. And I just, at that time, studied Merrick Garland, and if you listen to him talk, he describes the Justice Department as a post-Civil War thing that was designed to root out the KKK, and of course he was involved with Janet Reno and the Waco and the Ruby Ridge, and so, I mean, he has a long history with that. And I just, as someone who worked in the Justice Department, what your view of Merrick Garland and how ideological that he is.
Right. Well, I've had no direct contact with Merrick Garland. I was out the door before he came in there. But nobody wants to have racial animus on any side that's there, whether it's white supremacists or any other group. I mean, one dislikes all that. Well, what I will say is that, and this kind of gets back to my response to the woman who was asking a question a minute ago, and that is there are lots of problems with the FBI data on these things, and a lot of problems with the overall narrative that they have. So, for example, I'll give you one thing. They'll often talk about mass public shooters and try to emphasize that those are, right-wingers. And I've written on this a number of times. The thing is, basically what the media and what the administration has done is that when somebody's a racist, they'll go and classify themselves as a conservative or a right-winger, even though that's fairly clearly not the case. And I'll give you a couple examples. You'll take the Buffalo mass murderer from 2 years ago. That individual hated whites, or hated blacks, I'm sorry. And he was an obvious racist, that nobody would want to have as a friend. But the thing is, the reason he was a racist was because he was an environmentalist. This guy was worried about people having too many children. He thought that people having more children would damage the environment. And he thought that minorities, particularly blacks, were having too many kids. And so he thought it was his job to go and kill them that were there. And so, but you go and you read the New York Times or other places, they'll very frequently, you know, in the New York Times, I think had like 7 editorials where he was like Exhibit A for white supremacists out there. And all the time kind of referring to him as a conservative, right-wing type. You know, the guy referred to himself as a mild-mannered left-wing authoritarian. You know, he described himself as a socialist. And you see the same things with the El Paso mass murder and other ones, Cincinnati. So I don't know, maybe I live in a very closed-door life and don't really hang around with most conservatives, but I don't think there are a lot of conservatives that I know, at least, who are upset about people having too many kids, or too many conservatives that I know of that call themselves socialists. Or I'll give you an example, you know, the New Zealand mosque murderer. I actually got blocked on Twitter and other social media because I just pointed out in his manifesto, this guy's ideal form of government was communist China. I don't know, maybe, Peter can educate me on this, I'm sure, but maybe there's a lot of conservatives who really think we ought to model our government after communist China. Again, I guess I'm just isolated. But, and he was also worried about people having too many kids. And he, you know, he had this whole list of kind of English socialist leaders that he kind of idolized. And so, but, you know, the whole narrative in the media was that he was a right-winger that was there. And so if you look at all the mass public shooters in the United States from 1998 through the end of this last year, what you'll find is that there are about 8% that were white supremacists in some type. You know, either explicitly white supremacist or someone who was anti-immigrant or somebody who, I can't remember what the other thing was. So they weren't all explicitly white supremacists. But of that 8%, basically about half of them were that way for environmentalist reasons as opposed to something else. And many of the others would be like Nazis, National Socialist types, which again I wouldn't classify as a conservative right-winger type. The vast majority of mass public shooters have nothing to do with ideology. These are just individuals who want to commit suicide, but they want to commit suicide in a way that people will know that they were here. And so you'll very frequently read their diaries and manifestos where they'll write things like, if I can only kill more people than such and such did, I can get even more media attention. And, you know, they feel unappreciated. The women won't go out on dates with them. You read their diaries and manifestos, and that becomes pretty obvious why that's the case. But in any case, you know, it's not... you know, it's basically they feel unappreciated and they say, if I can do this, I'll get my name at least in the history books and people around the world will know who I was. You have somebody like the Sandy Hook mass murderer. He had worked on it for at least his plans for at least 2.5 years. The police described what he did was essentially a doctoral dissertation on mass public shootings in the past. He had actually graphed, according to one police report, he had actually graphed out the relationship between the number of people killed in an attack and the amount of media coverage that they got, because he wanted to prove to himself that the more people he killed, the more media attention that he could get. And I can't prove this, but it's just an educated guess on my part. But my guess is maybe one of the reasons why he went to an elementary school was that he thought it would be more shocking and that he thought he could get even more media attention. But again, that's just an educated guess on my part. So, I mean, these guys are very frequently, you know, explain in great detail why they do these attacks. And so, you know, to go and focus on the types of people that Merrick Garland and the White House wanted to focus on, I think is missing, basically what's going on there.
I see one central topic there, which is deception, dishonesty. And you clarifying most of these things, it's very useful because I was always wondering, and I couldn't quite answer, why is crime decreasing? Obviously, why is it wrong? And some of this intentional deception, and some of these are side effects of whatever, less arresting.
Yeah, I don't know how much it's intentional. I mean, I can just tell you what some of the things are there, when they try to impute values to the missing ones. I can just say that they're maybe not doing a very good job on it. But, it's possible you could get these numbers just because, people aren't reporting crimes as much too. The arrest rates are plummeting here. And so it's just kind of understanding that you have two different numbers. You have one that deals with reported crimes, but reported crimes are just a portion, or less than half of all the crimes that are there. And the rate that people report crimes changes with things like the arrest rate that's there.
Yeah, basically, in a dangerous neighborhood, be it Brazil, be it a ghetto, you don't report some minor things. And if you're nice,
You don't even always
white
report
neighborhood-
major things.
Pardon?
You don't always even report major things. Look at something like rape, for example.
Right.
The vast majority of rapes aren't reported to police. And the way we know that is because of the National Crime Victimization Survey data that we have. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
So my point is actually, if the newspapers or Biden reports that, that's dishonest because they report these data, and the stuff you report is missing. The reasons, the explanations why the numbers are like that, and why in reality crime is going up. So it's a manipulative thing. Okay, that was my point.
Yeah, well, it could be. Look, I try not to get into people's heads on these things about why they do the things that they do. What I can say is, I try to speak out. I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal this week that tried to go through, didn't have the graphs and stuff that I was showing you, but tried to go through and explain this. So, I don't know how many millions of people read the Wall Street Journal, but hopefully it makes it a little bit more difficult. But I mean, the media, look, whether it's the economy or whether it be crime, I think the legacy media right now, or mainstream media, whatever you want to call it, their goal is to try to make people think things are better than they are. And maybe that has to do with explicit. Maybe some of it is they just don't understand the numbers. But, so I'm an economist by training, and I could talk to you about the income data, employment. So like employment, they'll go in March and say that there are 303,000 new people with jobs. What the media doesn't talk about is that in March you had 697 new part-time jobs, okay? Most of those people were getting a second or third job, so they're not counted in 303. The number of full-time jobs fell for like the 7th month in a row. It's down like 7,000 that month. So basically what you have is more than the entire increase is part-time jobs that are there. And you also have something where if you look over the last year, American-born individuals lost about 700,000 jobs. There are 700,000 fewer employed than there were a year ago. And for non-native born Americans, their employment increased by like 1.6 million. Now, the Biden administration won't tell you how many of them are work permits that they've given out or whatever that's there for illegals. But, basically, my guess is the media, the perception that people have of the economy would be very different if you told them, well, all the jobs are part-time jobs. Many of them are people getting a second or third part-time job, and that the jobs for Americans is falling. So, they might view it as differently. But, if you want, I can give you a brief war story about my time in the U.S. Department of Justice that may give you a little bit of an insight into biases that's there. If you're interested, I'll give it. So anyway, one of the reasons why I agreed to go to take the job at the Department of Justice is I wanted to go and get data on the errors in the NICS background check system. The NICS system is the background check system that people go through in order to go and buy guns, okay? And you'll hear claims out there that there have been 4 million dangerous or prohibited people that have been stopped from buying guns because of background checks. And that's simply false. What they should say is there have been 4 million initial denials, and about 99+% of those are mistakes. It's one thing to stop a felon from buying a gun. It's another thing to stop somebody simply because they have a roughly phonetically similar name and similar birthday to a felon. And, you know, you fill out, I don't know how many of you have bought guns, but you fill out the 4473 form. And, you know, you put down your name, your address, your birthday, your social security number, your eye color, your height, your age, you know, all sorts of detailed information. And you think they're using all that information when really, for the vast majority of checks, they're just using roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays. And the thing is, what I had been told from people who worked in the system is that there's systematic errors that are going on. The problem is that people tend to have names similar to others in their racial groups. Hispanics have names similar to other blacks. Other Hispanics, blacks tend to have names similar to other blacks. And the thing is, 34% of black males in the United States are felons. 18% of Hispanic males are felons. 6% of white males are felons, and 3% of Asian males are felons. And so the problem is that when you have a group where you have a relatively high rate of people who are prohibited from owning a gun, you're more likely to have mistakes for other people who are law-abiding and should be able to go and buy a gun just because they're more likely to have roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays. So the system is essentially racist against black and Hispanic males because those are the people who are most heavily discriminated against by the background check system. These are law-abiding individuals who, through no fault of their own, the government's making it so that they can't go and buy guns to protect themselves and their families. So I wanted to get the hard data on how the system was discriminating against blacks and Hispanic males. And so when I went to the Department of Justice, I went and talked to the people at the Bureau of Justice Statistics. I told them about the issue. They were very interested. They went and approached the FBI people who keep this data. And the FBI people said no, they weren't interested in looking at it. And the problem is that it's not their job. You know, it's the Bureau of Justice Statistics people's jobs to determine what they want to go and look at. And it's the FBI's data to collect the data and to give the Bureau of Justice Statistics the data that they're asking for. And so the Bureau of Justice people said, well, it's not your job to determine this, give us the data. And the FBI came back and they said, well, we see no reason to break down this data by race and sex. And my response was, you guys break down everything by race and sex. What's the issue here? Why won't you break this down? So anyway, you have to understand this is during COVID. On my floor, there were about 300 desks. I had an office on the side. On almost all days, I was the only person that showed up on my floor or the floor above or the floor below me. And so it's not like you could go to somebody's office and bang on the door and get them to respond to you. You would go and send them an email or a voicemail, and after a couple weeks, the FBI people just stopped responding, and it would just go off into the ether there as far as I could tell. So anyway, time went by, and then 2 days after the election in November 2020, the FBI people get back to the Bureau of Justice Statistics people, and they say, okay, you'll have to fill out a FOIA request. For those who don't know, it's a Freedom of Information Act request. This is something reporters would do. I'm sure Peter would know about that. It's not something that one part of the Department of Justice does for another part of the Department of Justice when it's their job, particularly to go and get the data from one part to the other. And so anyway, and then to make it even worse, the FBI people said, but even if you can get us the form in today, there's no way we think we can get this data done until after January 20th, and we're sure that the Biden administration will not be interested in looking at this data. So anyway, we argue back and forth with them for a while, and they go disappear again. And then the Thursday before Thanksgiving, I get a call from Grover Norquist. Grover is kind of a conservative muckety-muck in Washington, D.C. Grover and I wrote a book together about 13 years ago or so. And anyway, Grover knew I was in the Department of Justice, and Mark Meadows, who was the chief of staff in the White House, who I know a little bit, had called up Grover and asked him to find out what things could be done before the end of the Trump administration that could be finished. And so Grover called me up. I gave him 2 ideas. One of them is the one I'm telling you about here. And Grover met with Mark, and it was my understanding that Mark liked both of my ideas, and he promised Grover that on Monday morning he was going to call up Bill Barr, the AG, and ask Bill to go and do 3 tasks. 2 of them were mine. So it's my understanding that Mark called up Bill, and then Bill contacted the FBI, and then almost immediately after that, Politico, which I don't know if you know, but it's kind of inside the Beltway. A lot of former Washington Post reporters went over there. Had a story with the headline at the top of their website saying, "Controversial pro-gun researcher joins Department of Justice." So apparently what happened was the FBI people, as soon as they were told to work with me, their response was to go and call up their friends in the media to complain that they were having to talk to me. And so anyway, all heck broke loose. It's my understanding that they got more emails and telephone calls demanding that I get fired than anybody else in the Trump administration, which I assume is some accomplishment. And then excuse me, and then there was like all these FOIA requests and stuff. The PR people were completely freaked out. And I said, you got 15 FOIA requests, but they're all from the same people. Their moms demand action, students demand action, every town for gun safety, the Trace. I say they're all Bloomberg groups. They probably just had a conference call saying, you asked for this, you asked for this, you asked for this. They just wanted to bury me in paperwork. They were asking for emails going back to 2015, for example. And so anyway, and then, so a couple weeks were pretty crazy dealing with that stuff. The following Monday, after Thanksgiving, the 9 Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee wrote a letter to Bill Barr demanding to know how somebody like myself could get hired at the Department of Justice. And then anyway, after a couple weeks, things kind of died down, and the FBI people are finally working with the BJS people on the data. And they give them the data after a little while, and the BJS people look at it, and something's wrong. The numbers aren't adding up. This isn't rocket science here. They're just, if you ever have an Excel file, it's just kind of adding up the columns that are there. It shouldn't, this should be like 10 minutes work to do this here. And so anyway, the BJS people called up the FBI people saying, well, this data makes no sense. And they say, oh, we're sorry, we're going to call you up, we really apologize, we'll fix it, and we'll get back to you. And so another week goes by, they provide the data again, it's still messed up. The BJS people call them up and say, oh, we're really sorry, we're going to call you up again, we're sorry, we'll fix it, we'll get back to you. That happened 4 times. The last time that happened was on January the 19th, 2021. We're out the door on January 20th. And there was a report that was supposed to come out on the NICS background check system where one section was going to be on these errors that I'm telling you about. The report came out, but it didn't have that section, which isn't too surprising because I'm sure the FBI people were right that the Biden administration wasn't interested in that stuff. But the reason why they're not interested, they want to push these gun control measures. They don't want people to know that these gun control rules that they're having which could be easily fixed. I don't know if any of you run private companies, But if you run a private company and you do a background check on employees, are you going to look at roughly phonetically similar names and similar birthdays to do it? No. If you go and suggest that to a businessman, they're going to think you're from Mars if you want to suggest that. And so, you know, basically the Democrats here want to hide the fact that their rules are racist and discriminating against black and Hispanic males, and making it so that people who just want to be able to get a gun to be able to go and protect themselves and their families are being stopped from doing it through no fault of their own. Now, you can go and appeal. The problem is you're talking about legal costs that are going to be like $3,000 on up to go and do that. Anyway, you had a question?
I think you answered it, actually. Thank you.
Okay.
John, I think that's it.
Okay.
Thank you, John. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. We'll reconvene at 3:15.